So welcome. This is the last talk on day 2 already. That's amazing. This is iRODS user group meeting on Wednesday. Kory Draughn from the iRODS Consortium is going to talk about our 1.0 release of NFSRODS. Kory?
All right, thanks, Terrell. Again, my name is Kory. I'm one of the core developers for iRODS, and I'm going to talk to you about the 1.0 release for NFSRODS. So for the people who aren't familiar with NFSRODS, just to give you an idea about what it's about, NFSRODS, if the name doesn't hint at it enough, basically it's a way for you to surface iRODS collections and data objects as an NFS mount point, so that people who have had a lot of time writing scripts and things, maybe in Linux, this allows them to basically reuse those scripts and basically interact with iRODS systems without having to learn things like the I commands or anything else like that. So it's great for that kind of thing. So just going back and looking at what we did since last year's UGM, I want to talk about the 0.8 release that was released at that time. I think when we did that, we were able to achieve a lot of great things with that release. Basically, we were able to prove to ourselves that we were able to map things like traditional Unix permissions and basically provide things like making the commands like ls and basically echo and other normal and common Unix command line tools work with iRODS through an NFS mount point. And so, but there were some things with that version of NFSRODS that left people feeling a bit weird, like I guess afraid to use, because for one, our original way of handling permissions was basically it involved using all of the permission bits. So that's user, well, more so it used the user and the world permissions to basically describe the what a user could do against a particular data object or collection. It also didn't support groups, and we wanted to make sure that we got all that stuff right. So we went back to the drawing board and worked on that quite a bit. So what's changed since the 0.8 release? Well, from that time and all the way up, we've been able to, I think, resolve all of the permissions issues through the use of NFS for ACLs. The NFS for ACLs basically provide a lot more granular controls over how we map things and between iRODS and basically the Linux environment. So these are vastly superior to the basic permission support that's provided through Chmod and other command line tools. And I'll talk about that on the next slide. We were also able to add support for groups in iRODS. So like all of your groups and things that you define within iRODS will work as long as you have them, as long as they can be resolved from the Linux side. We were also able to add SSL support, as well as alternative means to resolving user IDs and group IDs through SSSD. We also added a capability where it's that you can basically fetch the build information for your deployment of NFSRODS. This doesn't require that you stop the container if you're already running it. It's not intrusive in that basically you can just run the same command that you use to launch, or with even fewer options, and all you have to do is append the word SHA at the end, and it will produce and it would output that build information for you. This information is also available during startup of the container. We also were able to resolve like a lot of tiny issues, such as properly closing iRODS connections. So that's good. We also ran into some issues with previous versions since last year, where listing collections that had many entries underneath that would run into basically read directory errors. And we're happy that we were able to resolve that. Last but not least, we've begun adding support for testing via the BATS testing framework. So this is actually not something that was introduced with 1.0 release. This is actually something that was handled back in a point release. I think it was 0.9, but we were able to, rework the authorization model and using the NFS4 ACLs. And the way we did that was down here in this diagram. If you look, we have the NFS4 protocol provides us with two commands, NFS4 set FACL and NFS get FACL. And what these commands allow us to do is set various bits on basically a data object or collection, and NFSRODS will take those bits, and depending on the combination, it will produce a proper iRODS permission, and that's both ways. And just to give you an idea about how that works, I wanted to show you this information here in the README. Here, that basically, like anything I'm talking about now, you can find within the README as far as like how do you use NFS for set FACL and get FACL. If we take a look here, what happens when you set these bits is that NFSRODS will look at these bits and determine, and it will just take the max of whichever bit is there and determine, oh, okay, so they specified write owner, so we give them own permission. If we look at this example here, we're saying set FACL, we're going to add, and we're going to set and allow permission for John, and we're specifying that John has read data. He can read, and he can basically change the owner. In this case, in the iRODS land, this essentially translates to John has own permission for food.txt. Okay, so let's just go back to the slides and it's here. So this, while we were able to properly map both ways permissions between iRODS and the operating system without losing any information now, NFSRODS still makes use of the Unix permission, but in this case, we avoid setting any world permissions to scare away any people from using NFSRODS. So the only bits that are used is the owner bits to reflect the accessing users view of the world or permissions on that data object or collection. Basically, collections are always executable while data objects are never executable. The reason why collections are always executable is because iRODS, just using iCommands, iRODS allows you to navigate anywhere within a zone, assuming you have, basically you can reach that zone or you know the path. iRODS doesn't let you basically search around and just kind of figure out the landscape, but if you are aware of a particular path, then you can always navigate that. So by making collections executable, we are able to provide that same capability with NFSRODS. If you know the path, you can always get there. And following that, depending on your permissions, you may or may not be able to do things to collections and data objects. Okay, so just now we want to talk about some of the new features that were added, such as SSL. This is basically a slide about how you go about enabling that support. So step one, basically we just have to set the level of SSL negotiation policy for the client within NFSRODS. So this takes the same parameters that you would find for AC pre-connect within the iRODS core.re file, and depending on which one you set, you either will the behavior for basically how SSL is handled will change. The next step is simply just to have to basically volume mount your SSL certificate into the container at the right location. In this case, you always want to mount it at NFSRODS as _SSL.crt or read-only permissions. This is all that's necessary to add SSL support. And so we're happy to also announce that we have SSSD support, which basically allows users to use LDAP or Active Directory as an alternative to resolving user and group IDs through over Etsy password. And so we want to thank Jonathan Anderson with CU Boulder with this contribution. By having NFSRODS being an open source project, we like that people can contribute and fix issues with make other people make the project more accessible to other people. So that's always great to have people joining in and helping us with making this thing better. So just to go through how you would do this is simply a matter of, again, specifying an additional volume mount of that just points to your SSS socket. And with that, assuming you have your SSSD property set up correctly, you are able to use the your LDAP or Active Directory with NFSRODS as you wish to. And you can still use the Etsy password solution along with this. If you use both of them together, the NFSRODS container will just consult the Etsy password file first before using the SSSD stuff. So future work. So next step is we want to look at hard links. There are some situations with NFSRODS where hard links are required in order to support certain applications. I'll talk about that in more detail tomorrow during the hard links talk. We also want to add parallel transfer support, because right now NFSRODS is really, when it comes to moving large amounts of data through it, this can be pretty slow because everything is not parallel. It's just all serial. We use one stream to read and write bytes. And so the NFS4 protocol defines a parallel transfer mechanism, which we plan to investigate and see if we can make work with the current solution. If that doesn't play out the way we want, then we can always just implement our own, hopefully through the Jargon API. And hopefully we can give you parallel transfer with the next release. Another thing we're looking at is performance as far as things like listing collections and things like that, because there are some users who experience long wait times when they try to list directories and collections, which they figure shouldn't take but a few seconds, but maybe a second or two, but it's practically taking like 30 seconds or more. So we want to resolve that issue for everybody. Hopefully add in additional caching and things like that will resolve that and improve the responsiveness. We also want to look into adding unit testing as well as conformance testing. We have played around with conformance testing and verified that a lot of things passed with NFSRODS, but also a lot of things failed. And that's kind of like just the nature of the iRODS system. The only thing that we have to do with this is just verify. Basically, we have to sit down and figure out what does a passing conformance test look like for NFSRODS in regards to iRODS. Last but not least, we're hoping that because of all this work with NFSRODS, I think we've proven to ourselves and hopefully the community that we can make things such as SMB-RODS work. So this is hopefully something that we'll be looking at in the future. We have done experimental work way back before even the NFSRODS project came along. And hopefully because we have new libraries such as file system and IO streams, we can we hopefully can produce an SMB-RODS implementation sometime in the future, and add support for Windows users. So that's it, and thank you. Questions?
Thank you, Kory. I know that's a lot of work, and it's great to see it real now. We've drawn many pictures on the whiteboard. Yes. We do have a couple questions. So Don Sizemore at UNC wants to know if the NFS4 set FACL whitelist that is provided here is appropriate for like a service account. Would you want to give access to a service account? And why might that be good or bad or dangerous?
Wow, I have to think on that. I believe so. I think the whole point of the NFS4 whitelist had to do with certain users, like some accounts want to be able to set permissions for certain users, but because of how iRODS works and the way NFSRODS was implemented, that was not possible. So the whitelist just basically allows you to elevate the appropriate privileges for a person to be able to do that across an entire.
That's right. I remember the use case now. It was an administrator. So the iRODS permission model is linear, and NFS v4 ACLs are not linear, right? They're just attributes. They're labels basically. And so in iRODS, if you have the own permission, then you also have write permission and read permission. And this particular use case was around having an administrator be able to grant permission to others, but not themselves have write access to things. And so this whitelist allowed us to solve that opportunity.
Right.
And I think, and also, of course, if things are using the local auth based on SSST, then that may solve itself. That may resolve that question anyway. Let's see, we have one more question from Samuel at CNES. Would it be possible to both build and run NFSRODS without using Docker, which is not allowed in production environments at CNES at the moment? And I think I know the answer to this.
Yes, it's just the Docker container or the image is essentially just building NFSRODS for you and applying some, doing some special work to make SSL and SSSD work. But it's like you can just download Maven, you can install Maven and build it yourself. It's, you know, it's not a hard requirement on Docker at all. This was just, Docker was just a means of making it simple for people to basically use it.
Very good. Blake Joyce at Arizona has a question. He says, I'm a scientist by training and a novice when it comes to databases and architecture systems. We have a shared storage array at the University of Arizona HPC. It's GPFS under the hood and presents to users as NFS. How would NFSRODS interface with a data array like that? And what kinds of benefits would it provide us when working with our research community?
It's hard to say exactly. I don't know all of the different ways it can be used, but I'm assuming there may be some benefits with using it with a system like that. I mean, obviously, if you can resolve the user IDs to users, then you should be good to go. But from there, I can't say further how it will perform as far as speed and things like that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest benefit would probably be the abstractions that iRODS provides would still hold. Right. The whole point of this is the NFSRODS is just another client from the iRODS side, but it makes it easy for the users. So I think that answers his question. Of course, anybody wants to ask questions directly, you can raise your hand. Let's see. Tan wants to know from Utrecht, he says, how are concurrent writes processed?
They actually aren't handled right now. If you're talking about, I'm assuming you're talking about parallel transfer. We don't support it right now through NFSRODS. That's something that we have to work on. Like there is an NFS for parallel transfer support provided by the NFS4J project, but we have to investigate that because it looks like we have to research that situation because I'm not familiar with how the NFS4 parallel system works just yet.
Right, and I'm not sure if Tan might mean, I mean, iRODS is not a parallel file system, so I don't assume he means parallel writes into the system itself. He may be talking about transfers. Tan, if you're there, if you want to say something else, you can, I think, unmute. He has typed locking, so it sounds like that's going to be more covered by the replica status that Alan was talking about yesterday. We have logical locking soon in iRODS, and that would prevent concurrency issues that we obviously already have anyway. So this, again, would just be another client. So I think, Tom, the answer is that it's coming soon and it will be better in the future.
Yes. I mean, one thing you can always do that we've shown with even DStream, which I'm sure we could mimic using Jargon API if we decided to go that route, is we could just implement our own version of parallel transfer and just seek into the right locations and just do it across multiple threads, and that will achieve the same, performance gains, hopefully.
Let's see, is there anything else we've said? Have we tried running horizontally scaled? And then, I don't know, maybe, Jonathan, do you want to, let's see if you can, I'm not going to call you out, but if you would like to unmute, you can talk about this a little bit. You seem to answer Mike Conway's question about running horizontally.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes,
cool. Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. So we aren't doing this for performance at this point, but just we have 4 existing data transfer nodes that we run Globus on, or run our Globus endpoints on, and so it seemed like the right thing to deploy NFSRODS on those, especially since our NFSRODS is largely there to be mountable by Globus. So what we do is run NFSRODS, run the container on each of those 4 nodes, and then all 4 of those nodes are already in a round-robin DNS. And so in our auto mount, where we have the NFSRODS mount points defined, it just points to that round-robin. And so far, that's been fine. Yeah, we haven't noticed any issues doing that, and I've definitely tested like concurrent IO across, or not within a file, but we've been doing stuff on all 4 of them without any trouble.
Right. Excellent.
Great.
Mike Conway also is curious whether collection listing is dropping into a specific query for speed up. That's probably an optimization we have not yet made. Is that true, Kory?
Yes, like I'm sure there are lots of opportunities within the implementation to, improve things. Right now, you could say this is just like, right now it works, but I do know I'm aware of places within the code where it could benefit from caching, or maybe doing what Mike mentioned, dropping down the jQuery and doing things. But I can't say exactly how it will affect things.
Very good. Anybody else have any more questions? Let's see. I think that might be it, Kory. You might be off the hook until tomorrow morning.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you, sir. Excellent job.